And I saw this tiger and fired 2 shots at it and hit it with both shots. And it started to smoke. I fired 1 shot at the second tank in line. He immediately blew up. I was frightened, but when things start to happen, you get over your fear a bit. And I was sort of thinking, get the bastards before they get me, you know. And
Joe, tell us where you're born and where you grew up.
I was born in a little village called Yeldon, which is in Northamptonshire, and I lived there until I was 16, and then we moved into Rushden, where I live now, which is a small town, for about a year, and then I volunteered for the army.
So when did you actually enlist?
1940.
And so what did you do over that period after you enlisted?
I enlisted at Bedford, and I was in a reserved occupation, so I had a little difficulty in getting in. I was only 17, and I got sent to Bovington, to the tank camp there, and I did 6 months training at Bovington, which a lot of waste, a lot of bullshit. I can never understand why we did 6 weeks square bashing, and out of 6 months, when we really need to be learning about tanks. And after that, I was posted to the Northamptonshire Yeomanry, and then for the next 2 years we just hung about, really. So much in the army that this is what we do, we've always done it, and you do it, and it's a absolute waste of time. Painting stones white and all that sort of thing, you know, and the guard duties. I mean, we were in a park, in a big park in England, and all the tanks were all around this park, and they put 2 men on guard who used to walk around this park, supposed to be on guard in all these tanks. You know, absolute waste of time. 2 men just wandered around, and when we could have been doing tank recognition, aircraft recognition, we didn't do enough of that sort of thing. I mean, map reading, I mean, I learned to map read, but not very well. I don't think we spent half enough time on those sort of things. Morse code, we learnt Morse code. Those were the sort of things that you needed. I mean, the time we spent actually learning to operate the radio, time we spent actually learning to fire the gun, and the time we spent actually learning to drive the tank were valuable. But they were a very small proportion of the time that, mainly I suppose because I couldn't afford to let you fire guns all day long and whatnot. I got enough petrol to drive and all that, so they had to fill in a lot of time when you were doing nothing.
When you're training, what did they teach you about the German tanks?
Not much. We had tank recognition courses. You could get in trouble, you know, and punished for having a dirty belt. But in the tank recognition classes, you could sit in the background, go to sleep, and nobody bothered, you know. That's how the training was. We understood that it took 5 Shermans to deal with 1 Tiger, and that they had better guns than we did. But at that time, I didn't know what an 88 shell could do to a tank. They could, you know, they'd go in and one side out the other sort of thing of some of our tanks. But the main thing was that they could knock out our tanks at a safe distance as far as they were concerned. I mean, a Tiger could sit here quite safely out of distance of any danger from the tanks they were firing at and knock them out. And the only way that you could overcome that was by having more tanks than he had, which is what happened in Russia, isn't it? With all the T-34s, they had thousands of them, and they beat the Tigers. But they weren't better tanks than the Tigers. But we weren't told that, you know, we weren't, they didn't want to tell us that, you know, I mean, a stupid thing to tell us, wouldn't it? You know, they've got better equipment than you've got. So we didn't know too much about the German stuff.
So what about combat techniques? Did you teach you how to dig in, or how to prepare, how to advance?
Yeah, they did. I mean, we did little exercises and little schemes and all that sort of thing, but it was nothing like nothing like the real thing. I mean, you learned how to use a gun, and you learned how to drive, and these were the main things that you needed. But I suppose the officers, not what they thought were tactics, but the way they worked out afterwards. So I thought we wasted a lot of time, and when we could have been training, you know, a lot more. But they were eventually during that time. I mean, we changed our role quite often, and got into new tanks. We went through from Valentines through Matildas and about 3 other sorts until finally we got Shermans. And we were training with Shermans for some considerable time until about a couple of months before D-Day we got the Firefly.
You like the Firefly?
Oh, I like the Sherman as the best tank that I was in. We didn't know very much about it. There's a little difference in the turret because they had to allow for the extra recoil, they had to push it back a bit or something. I don't really know, but generally speaking, no, other than that, I like the Sherman because mainly, I suppose, because it was faster than the others. And of course, after the battle, I liked it because it proved that it had got a better gun than. And this, I don't know whether it applied to all of them, but in our case, there were no co-driver. Where the normal Sherman had a co-driver, so a 5-man crew, where we were a 4-man crew. And I think the only reason that made more storage for the bigger shells. And they drafted out new crews and made me the gunner on the Firefly. We went to the range and I fired 5 shots. And that's all we fired before we went to France.
Were you ready for battle then? Not really.
I mean, we were as ready as anybody is. So I don't think anybody ever is ready. I mean, I don't think the Germans were any better. You know, I mean, it seems to me if you look back that the battles were always won by the people who got the strongest or the best equipment. And that started off with the Germans and ended up with us or the Russians having the best. So if you had the best equipment, then you won, you know.
So when did you finally head off? You finally get into action?
We arrived in Normandy on D6 when there was a small bridgehead, and we landed. An easy landing, actually. We drove straight up on the beach and straight off into the bridgehead, and then it was confusion. It was still a tiny bridgehead, and they were packing stuff in, you know. And for 6 weeks, that was the worst 6 weeks of my war. For 6 weeks we were in that tiny brigade, and we were getting shelled and hammered, and there were dead people all over the place. It was a stench. It was terrible, absolutely terrible. You drove your tank and you drove over dead arms, and it was really, really awful that 6 weeks.
When did you first encounter the Germans, like face on?
Well, during that 6 weeks, we didn't do much. Well, they wanted us not to do much, I don't know, but they used to send you out just to take a field or a hedgerow, the hedgerow in front, and it seemed they always sent less troops than it needed to do it. I think it was we were just holding the army there, and from what I read later on, the plan or the plan that they said they had was for us to hold it while the Americans went round out to the coast and down and round the back. So whether we were supposed to get any further than we did in that 6 weeks, I don't know, but it was a terrible time in there.
So you could hear shelling all along the front? It was constant noise?
You were being shelled wherever you were, and it used to be quite funny sometimes when it eased up a bit, and somebody would go to the loo, which was a pole over a trench, and be sitting there with his trousers down and just start shelling again, and he'd run with his trousers round his knees, so that there was a bit of humour in it, but mainly it was awful. And then of course I tried to get out with Goodwood, didn't I? We weren't involved in Goodwood, we were still just holding, and because I lost all the, 300 tanks in one day or something.
As this was going on, like at Goodwood,
yeah.
Are people feeding you information about dealing with the German tanks? Are you getting more information? Are there is feedback coming? Are you getting a better feel?
Not much. No. We're sitting there, and you would sit there, and perhaps 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd call the tank commander over for orders, and they'd come back and say, right, we're going to take that edge, and we're going with the so-and-so infantry, and right, we'd load up and shoot off and go to that edge, and very often it didn't seem much purpose in doing it, but they were.
Were you losing men all the time from the shelling and from?
Oh yeah.
So you start to see some of your friends.
So yes. Well, the chap I was most friendly with, he caught it after about 3 days. And there again, you see, when we talk about the training and the orders, I mean, the orders were that when you stopped, you dug a slit trench and got into it. And I mean, we were still being told that, and that were the orders. And when we saw what happened to the infantry, they were already in the slit trenches, and you soon realised that you were safer in the tank than you were in a slit trench. But you were still, the orders were that you still dug a slit trench. But, we didn't bother with that.
So by the end of July, now the 33rd Armoured Brigade.
Yeah, well, the 33rd Armoured Brigade attached to the Canadian Army, and we're told that we're going to pull out from the bridgehead. Actually, we're quite pleased that at least something was going to happen, and it appears that General Solomons was his name, the Canadian general, had worked this plan out that we went at night and advanced into the enemy territory. So they pulled us back to a reasonably quiet place, and we did 2 days training with lining the tanks up in columns and marching forward. I don't think anybody knew what they were doing until August the 7th. We were on the left-hand side of the Carnflays Road and the Canadians on the right-hand side. And we were 2 columns with the Northamptonshire Yeomanry and the 148 RAC, and then 2 lots of the Canadians over the other side of the road.
August 7th, 1944. More than 25,000 British and Canadian troops assemble for Operation Totalize, a major offensive devised to crack the German defensive line south of Caen. Unlike previous operations, Totalize is planned as a night assault to confuse the Germans and limit their response. It begins at midnight, August 8th. The initial attack is a success, and in less than 4 hours, the Allies break through the German lines and begin advancing south. Progress in the dark is slow for some units, while others, like the Northamptonshire Yeomanry and the Sherbrooke Fusiliers, proceed quickly to their objectives. Isolated from the main force, they dig in for the inevitable German counterattack. And so it is, in the early hours of August 8th, that the stage is set for the Allies' final confrontation with the Black Baron.
Well, we lined up at 9 o'clock at night. It was getting a bit dark, but we did have the advantage of artificial moonlight, which meant that they shone the searchlights on the clouds, and the reflection came down and lightened it up a bit. And it made a bit of difference, not a great deal, but it made a bit of difference. But what they did do, they fired both shells. They fired tracer down the direction that we were supposed to go, so that you could see the tracer going down. Or I believe so. I couldn't. I was inside the tank, and as a gunner, you just sat there. You couldn't see anything, not even out your periscope. It was dark, and as I say, you just sat there and frightened to death. Relying absolutely on your driver to keep inside of the tank in front, and not to fall in a hole or a ditch, and there were tanks that one tank went down the railway bank and tipped over, and, in fact, one of our tanks got so far lost that he joined the 148 Regiment and stopped with them for the next 3 days. After a bit, the Germans started just shooting anywhere, I think. So there were lights in the sky, and there were shells shooting about and whatnot. But being inside, just inside the tank, and it was a radio silence, so that there weren't anything going on. You weren't being told anything over the radio to know what was happening. You just sort of sat there, And the bleed tank fired some very light, so you could add something else to follow,
When you were lining up for Totalize, did you have a good feeling about Operation Totalize, or weren't sure? I mean, night attack. This was something.
Didn't really know much about it. We weren't told all that much. We were just told that we were going to go and we were going to go to St Agnes, sort of thing. I mean, I suppose that the officers knew a bit more than we did, although I don't think I knew very much about it. And quite frankly, that's what the war was about all along, It was just, look, you did this, you did that, and without very much planning, I'm afraid. And we just went. And, as a gunner, I'd got nothing to do. And it was just so frightening that you were... I mean, when things were happening, you tend to forget. You see, you can't be frightened all the time. And I mean, I've been frightened during the 6 weeks that we were in the bridgehead. But eventually you get so that a certain fear becomes normal. It's only the excesses that that you worry about. So you were frightened, but as I say, when you were doing something, I mean, when you were firing a gun and whatnot, you tend to concentrate on that but just sitting there in the tank doing nothing. I mean, the driver was reasonably happy, he was doing something. The commander was looking out the top, he could see what happened, but the gunner and the loader just sat there and you couldn't even have the wireless on because we were relying on the driver to drive us, not run into anything. And they were just following the tank in front. That was all you had to do. You didn't know anything else, and all you could do was just sit there and hope for the best, which we did. And eventually, I suppose about 5 o'clock the next morning, we'd reached St Agnium, which was the yeomanry objective, and there was still some German infantry, I suppose, in the town, and we were with the 51st Highland Div, the Black Watch, who had followed us up, and they cleared the village, and again it was all confusion, you know. It took us about 4 hours, I suppose, for us to sort us out, and eventually there were orchards all around the village. We passed through the village and in these orchards, and you could look out across the open ground to the Carnflies Road that went along the top of the ridge sort of thing.
At 8 a.m. August 8th, the yeomanry has reached its objective, Saint-Aignan, and is moving into the woods south of the village, where its units will take up defensive positions in case of a German counterattack.
Today there's no orchards and very little woods, but this whole area was wooded in 1944. And from here they got a commanding view of the area to the south and to the west. You can see the Route Nationale over here, and the Germans were further south. Explain what the terrain was like when you were coming down and setting up, if you could see it from where you were. I know how difficult it would be.
Well, from where we were, the terrain was fairly flat. I mean, we were in the orchard here, and the train, there was a bit of a dip, and then up to the main road, but not a great deal. And as it went round, there was a bigger dip, and the gully was there too, so that for a start off we were looking at fairly flat ground, and then as we went round, when we fired, when the main attack came in, the ground certainly dipped more then.
For the Germans, the situation is critical. Operation Totalize has broken their defensive line, decimating an entire division in the process. Now it threatens to cut off all remaining German units in Normandy. They have no choice but to strike back without delay to halt the Allied advance. Kurt Meyer, commanding the 12th SS Division, is ordered to launch a counterattack near the Route Nationale. Faced with overwhelming odds, Meyer calls upon the one man capable of turning the tide, the Black Baron.
So you're hitting Saint-Aignan, and the infantry are setting up.
Yeah.
And tell me what the commanding officer does with you guys. Just expand on moving into the orchards and setting up your defensive position.
Well, it's left mainly to the troops. I mean, I suppose you're told a troop on the left and so and so, and then you sit yourself out and sort yourself out, and right down to the tank crew sorting itself out into its little niche, you know. And we, as I say, we were undercover anyway because we were in the orchards, and we just sat there and for some time, and nothing appeared to be happening.
Did you feel isolated when you were digging in?
Oh yeah, we were right out in front. And we were well out in front because the 148 who were on our side of the road with us had got held up some miles back, so we were right out in front on our own. And we were set out around the village with a squadron on the right, looking at the road at about 1,200 yards. And my troop on the extreme right, and then there was C Squadron, and then B Squadron, and then on B Squadron nothing, of just Germans. And we sat there. We eventually got a position in the orchards and under cover. We sat about, and so we decided to have breakfast. And we all got out and started to brew up. I suppose that was about 10 o'clock time. Now, although I didn't hear very much of this, but I understand that the Air Force then came and bombed onto the left of where we were supposed to be, and they dropped the bombs a bit too close to us. But we were on the far side, so it didn't affect us all that very much. And we sort of just hung about with a few shells dropping and whatnot, but nothing much happening. And then somebody who was on watch said that there were some tigers coming across the front of our ground.
August 8th, 1944. In the Normandy village of Sintot, German tank commanders discussed their plans to react to the Allied offensive. Kurt Meyer consults with Michael Wittmann and other officers to plan a counterattack. Their main concern is a group of Canadian tanks massing for an attack on a ridge to the north. Meyer orders Wittmann to take his Tigers and hit the Canadians. If Wittmann can surprise the Canadians and throw them into disarray, he will buy valuable time for the Germans. At 11:30 a.m., Wittmann shakes hands with Meyer and mounts his Tiger. And at 12:30 p.m., he attacks.
Was this the first time you'd ever seen a Tiger tank?
Yes.
Did you know what it was?
Partly because somebody said there's 3 Tigers coming across the front. But yeah, I did reckon when I saw, I did realise that they were Tigers. Yes, I knew enough recognition just to.
But they had quite a reputation as a tank. I mean, from the other guy, all the other guys, a lot of the Shermans were quite worried about these things. I mean, all the guys with the 75s were worried about encountering a Tiger. Was that a fair worry?
Well, yeah, but we didn't really know enough about the difference and whatnot. And of course we all got in to have a look, and I saw these 3 Tigers come in, across in front of us. As I say, about 1,200 yards away. And my tank commander told us to get in and mount up, which we did, and got in, and we were looking out. And he said, well, wait till they get to about 800 yards. And I was now starting to get a bit itchy. And looking out, and realised that they're the squadron leader, so second in command, had decided now to come over from the squadron, and he pulled over, still in the orchard under cover, and came over to watch it as far as I can see. I don't know what else he come over for. Anyway, I realised that there was just a troop on this bit of the front, and that only one gun was going to do any good against the Tigers, even if it did. I mean, I'd never checked it, so I'd never tried it, and because the troop was 1 Firefly and 3 75mm, and 75mm wouldn't touch a Tiger over 300 yards. So I realised that I was the only gun that were going to do any good. Anyway, at 800 yards, my commander, that was Sergeant Gordon, said, pull out. So we pulled out from the orchard and into the open. So the tank commander said, advance driver, and we could see someone through the leaves. There's a target, the rear target, and fire when ready. And that means that, all right, I look through the sight, and once I know that I'm on, then I can fire as I want. And you fire with your foot. You've got one hand traversing and one up and down, and you've got two pedals, either your gun or your machine gun, with your foot. So you traverse until you're on, and then you press the button and fire. The commander got the gun somewhere on the target, so by saying traverse left, traverse left, traverse left. And when it was somewhere on, then the gunner then took over and got his sights right down on me. And I saw this tiger and fired 2 shots at it and hit it with both shots. And it started to smoke. And the commander said to the driver, reverse into cover, because that was one of the plans that we had learned, that you back into cover and move over and come out somewhere else so that you're not in the same position, you see. That's the idea. And as we were reversing back into cover, I'd look round at the second tank and I saw his gun traversing round towards us. We couldn't fire because we were on the move, and in those days you had to stop before you could fire to get the gun. Anyway, we pulled back under cover, and as we did so, I don't absolutely know, but I think one of the shots must have hit our turret lid, because the next thing that I knew, we were back in the orchard under cover, and Sergeant Gordon had gone out of the tank, and I understood that he was dazed, and it appeared that he'd been hit on the head by the turret. So I think that's what must have happened. Never saw him again, so there was no way of finding out. Anyway, the troop officer came out of his tank and jumped into ours, because again it was the only tank that could do anything. And I'd thought that by now, because my squadron leader had got 2 more Firefly in his other 2 troops, which were quite close. I mean, he had time to motor over, so they had got time to motor over, and I thought, but by now I'd have had some help. One of them would come over, but the military mind don't work that way, and they were quite happy to just sit there and watch. And so now we were ordered out again, and I realised that I've still got to do it. And we pulled forward, and I fired 1 shot at the second tank in line, and he immediately blew up. Again, we were the troop officer reversed us under cover again, and I could see that the first one now was milling around a bit. I take it looking for a bit of cover. But anyway, we then pulled out again, and I fired 2 shots at him and finished him off. And it appears that Captain Boardman, who was watching, had been timing it, and he got it timed down as 12 minutes for the complete operation. I still think that he should have done more to have helped me out. No way could he think that I was going to knock out 3 tigers. And if I had done it, I mean, I don't know what would happen.
What were your nerves like when you're doing this?
I was frightened. But when things start to happen, you tend to, I don't know, to get over your fear a bit. And when we pulled out the second time, I was probably more frightened, but I was also, I think, a bit excited. I'd just knocked one out, I think I was sort of thinking, get the bastards before they get me, you know, and I don't know really. You just do it, you know. You just.
Norm Christie recounts the dramatic events on the fields outside Sinto that day.
The plan called for 5 tanks to come across this field and 2 to go on the other side of the Route Nationale. Their objective was to get over the hill and hit the Canadian tanks that were massing there for the second phase of Operation Totalize. It takes them about 10 minutes to get into this area, and bang, the first Tiger gets hit. In the meantime, Wittmann is over by the Route Nationale. He must have seen this because his radio communication goes,
Achtung! Achtung! Wag von rechts! Wag von rechts!
The second tank goes up. It's brewed completely up in the air. And the third tank is disabled because they've hit the wheels of the track and it's trying to get out and it's retreating. In fact, it goes backwards across this field and bang, it goes up. So in a few minutes, the field is all burning wreckage. The men are climbing out of the turrets. They're bringing their wounded. They're trying to get out of here before they're shot down. And as they go by, they see Tiger number 007, and it's not moving, and its turret is askew to the east. So what would have happened if you didn't take all 3 of them? They would have come at you in the orchard.
Well, they'd have had a run straight into. All right, I suppose they'd have got the other fireflies over sometime, but.
So I have one question on the one that was. I mean, there's different accounts on this one tank that
yes.
loses control. And there are some aerial photographs. Yeah. Was he trying to reverse by any chance, or one of the guys? It shows a tread from the field. It shows some circles in the dark field. So he looks like he lost control, or I turned around.
I mean, I think that they were, particularly the third one. The third one definitely were milling around looking for cover. I think perhaps the second one must have realised they were being fired on and fired back. What he did after that, before I got him, I don't really know. But certainly he was still facing the way of safety when I shot him. But you see, there weren't a lot of cover there, and they must have been looking for every bit of cover that. Like, I mean, if somebody was shooting us, the first thing you think about is going to cover, you know. So I'm sure that even if one of them did reverse, it would be reversing to try and get into cover. And of course, you don't move very fast when you're advancing into unknown. So they weren't moving very, very fast.
When they first were reported, were they firing or were they just going?
No, just going. When they first reported, they were and from the German reports that I've read since, they didn't realise that they thought that the main opposition would from the other side of the road, from where the Canadians were, and in fact, from the German report, one Tiger went up the left-hand side of the road, which I believe is the one that what's his name?
Walters.
Radley-Walters got, which was commanded by a bloke named Hoffler. And 4 tanks came up my side of the road. And in fact, one of them got through without any of us seeing him, because the next morning, and I would think that they did the sensible thing, because the one in front, when it was found, it was entirely intact, and So I think they realised that they were in a mess, that they were well forward with their three mates had gone, and I think they did the sensible thing, jumped out and ran, because the next morning or so they found one tiger knocked out on the left-hand side of the road, and on my side of the road there were three knocked out and one abandoned. As I said, the abandoned one was way up, getting towards the 148, where the 148 unit were.
In the aftermath, no one is sure exactly what became of the Black Baron. He is simply declared missing in action. At the time, the only clues to his fate are a few scattered reports from surviving German tankers.
When I looked out to the left, I saw that Michael's tank wasn't moving. The turret was displaced to the right and tilted down to the front somewhat. When I got to within about 250 to 300 meters, as a flame suddenly shoot from the tank, and the turret fly off and fall to the ground.
These accounts would remain unsubstantiated for decades, until a photo of the battlefield taken by a French farmer in 1945 confirmed at least some of the details surrounding the destruction of Tiger 007.
So right after this action, you must have felt pretty good.
I felt, thank God that I'm through that. It's not my day today, because every day you were, it could have been your day, you know, and you were just thankful that you were sorry for those that had copped it, but I think you were more pleased with yourself for not catching it, which is selfish, but you know, I was relieved more than anything that I'd got them and they had got me, you know, that if you can understand that.
So how long afterwards, after this great success, the yeomanry are attacked again? This time
Well,
on the other side.
what happened was that after we'd got the three, we pulled back in the orchard and we sat there for a bit, and then somebody reported that the main attack now, because it was coming in to our left, so that would be on C Squadron's section. So my trunk officer pulled us into a position to look that way. We were looking that way, but to look this way, and we saw the first tank coming over at 1,200 yards, and we fired at him and I hit him, and he went up, and we sat there, and they were coming round a bit to the left of our front now, so that was the only one tank that we saw. The others were coming around beyond the gully sort of thing, and the next thing that we saw were infantry coming up the bit of a rise, and we gave them a bit of machine gun fire, and they went under cover, and then about 2 minutes afterwards there was a massive great bang, and sparks went all around the turret, and we'd copped it, and the officer said, everybody out, and I did what you're supposed to do, and that's make sure the gun weren't over the top of the driver's seat, and we all copped out, and we all got out actually. We were lucky, but the officer, we all ran back the opposite way to where the Germans were and where we thought our HQ was. I ran pretty fast, I can tell you, and our officer, he got wounded by no shrapnel or bullets, because there were bullets and what were flying about all over the place. He got wounded, but the other of us all got back, and then this was, I suppose, 2 o'clock time, and then for the afternoon, then the yeomanry were in a battle. And in fact, one German tank got in the gully and just sat there and picked off our yeomanry tanks one after the other. But in the day, the yeomanry claimed 15 tanks and 5 SP guns, and we lost 20 yeomanry tanks. And so we were the second one that copped it. The Germans used to call us Tommy Cookers, you know, because because they burnt so easily. The one bad thing about the Shermans, which really, I mean, I like the Sherman, but they did burn. We did know a bit about that before we went over, but not realise how bad it was. I mean, all right, the time with the one that we got hit in, we jumped out, and as we ran off, I looked back and it was already burning. I could never understand how metal could burn like it did, but already with the petrol and everything that went out, wasn't it? But they used to. A lot of our casualties were burnt. Well, when we got knocked out and we were running back up the orchard, and another one, some 30 yards away from us, got hit at the same time and blew up. And in fact, there was one bloke got out with it was burning. You know, I don't really know how to explain it, but there's so much happening that it just doesn't register, you know. It just doesn't register. I mean, all I was concerned with them were getting back out of the way, you know, and I suppose if I'd have been near enough to help the bloke, I'd have helped him, but you know, we weren't anywhere near and the battle went on for the rest of the afternoon.
And when did that start? That started right after, or was there a break between the three Tigers and the next one?
Yes, a little break. I can't really remember how long, but certainly there was a break, yes. And if you read the German records, they say that the Tigers did the first attack because they wanted to they felt they couldn't wait to repulse it. But then, again, to just show you how useless they are, that evening we had new tanks come up, and they allotted new crews, and the bloke who had sat there and watched me prove I were a good gunner made me a wireless operator. And I never fired a gun again in the war.
Did you get decorated for this?
No. I was annoyed that he made me a wireless operator for a start, but afterwards I was pleased because I went into a 75mm Sherman, and we fought in every action that the Yeomanry was in for the next 7 months. And we got knocked out again, but we were a lucky tank, and we all came through, which was one of the few lucky tanks that went right the way through the war.
I find it very strange that you knocked off 3 Tigers and they took you off being a gunner.
Yeah. Well, don't say that. No, look, the officers were only the same age as us, 20, 21. They got no experience. None of us were experienced, and we just went and some of the officers hadn't even got common sense. I mean, it must be common sense to make a gunner. But I mean, as I say, I'm quite sure that I should have had support from other fireflies, and the fact that this one tank got in the gully and knocked so many of our tanks out, that gully ought to have been reconnoitred beforehand, but you know, it didn't happen, and the Germans weren't any better, in spite of the fact that they make them out to be all these great soldiers and whatnot. They were just the same as us. They made me say, they must have done, mustn't they? Otherwise we wouldn't have beat them. After, I mean, all right, well, I'd been in the army now for 3 years. We'd done very little, and quite frankly, I volunteered for the army, but after a fortnight I realised I'd done the wrong thing. I knew I was never going to be a soldier, or not the way they wanted to be a soldier. And from that day I decided to keep my head down and get out as soon as I could. Well, it took 4 years, but that's how it happened. And, you know, do as little of the bullshit as possible and learn as much of the necessary stuff as I could and get through if you could. And that's how it was. And I mean, as I say, the officers were all young, hadn't got a clue what they were doing really. But no, they're the generals, are they? When you read about it, I mean, look at the mistakes they made.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm just going to take you back now to one little thing. I just want to sort of, from your eyes, what can you see as a gunner? I mean, when you're driving along, what can you see?
You can't see very much. You're looking through a periscope that big, so it depends how close you are to what you want to see. I mean, your vision goes out. So at 800 yards, you can see a fair way. I can see enough to probably see two of the tanks, targets, and little movement, see the three. But at 800 yards, I mean, they're tiny, you know. I mean, it's 3/4 of a mile.
That's some good shooting. You got to compliment yourself on the shooting.
Yeah, I must have had some natural ability because you had to aim off to get. I mean, when they're moving, you've got to aim off so they drive into it. But I mean, I never learned how to do that. I mean, nobody ever told you how to aim off. You just.
What about the shells that you were firing?
Yeah.
Who would call for armor-piercing high explosive? Who would make that call?
The tank commander. But we never fired anything, only armor-piercing. Well, that's not true. We did fire HE at one stage, but later on in the war, they missed Le Havre, and we were brought back to Le Havre when they went in and cleared Le Havre, and they just lined the tanks up about 2 miles outside Le Havre with a lorry load of ammunition behind each tank, and we just fired them into Le Havre, like artillery really, and that was HE, of course.
So were you with the 1st Canadian Army all the way through, or did you get detached after Normandy?
For a long time, yes, right the way up into Holland anyway.
So did you get to know the Canadian guys at all?
Not really. I didn't even know the people in our squadron. You knew your own tank crew, and your own tank crew were like a little family. You had to be. I mean, let's face it, you lived together, you slept together, you lived in a tank. I mean, as I say, we stopped digging trenches, we just lived in the tank. You lived in it day and night, and there were 5 of you. And I mean, rank didn't mean anything either. Your decisions were like a little committee. You took a decision, you know, and that's how you lived. Outside that, all right, you knew the people in the other tanks in your troop. Well, that's if you're like me. I weren't very. I don't mean unfriendly, but I didn't make a lot of acquaintances, you know. But I knew the people in the troop. But outside that, I didn't know a lot of people in the other squadrons or in the other troops in a squadron. So that to know anybody in another regiment was just not.
Tight group of guys. It was a very tight group of guys then.
Yeah.
So that teamwork, though, also that tight group was what would make you good, wouldn't it, in a tank group?
Oh, absolutely. You relied on each other for your life, you know. I mean, they were relying on me to hit him, you know, but I also relied on the driver to get us through. And
so take me through this. Like you're in the tank, you're the gunner. I don't know the commands and what's going to happen. Tanks are coming up. You're preparing to fire. Can you just explain to me again what orders you're getting and?
Yeah, all right. The orders we get was advance to the driver who pulls out, and to the gunner, target the orders I got anyway would target the rear gun and fire when ready. you didn't always get the fire when ready. I mean, some commanders gave different orders, different ways of doing it, but we'd been working together as a little crew, and that was the way. So the fire went ready, and as soon as I was ready to fire, I fired, and immediately the gunner, the loader reloads, so you're ready again, and I fired a second shot. The tank commander then said, drive a reverse, and he pulls us back. So that's the sort of way it goes. And when we went out the second time, it was advance out again, and again fire when ready, you know.
That's the questions I wanted to ask.
Was it better to be in a tank or in the infantry?
Yes. The reason was I didn't like walking. The main reason. As regards anything else, I don't think, I realised after a couple of weeks that it didn't matter who you were, it didn't matter who you prayed to, it didn't matter how often you prayed, it didn't make a scrap of difference. If you were going, you went. And I became a fatalist overnight. And I'm glad I did, because I think that's the only way you could survive. If you worried about it or decided that if you prayed you'd get away or this and that, but it didn't matter, you know. The religious people were dying just the same as the others, and the infantry were getting killed, the tank crews were getting killed, and it didn't matter who you were, where you were. Your officers were getting killed, the men were getting killed. If you were going to get killed, you got killed, and each morning you went out, and if you got killed, you got killed, and at night, if you hadn't been killed, you were bloody pleased, you know. But that's the only way that I can explain it. You did what you had to do because I don't know why, really, because I suppose for the same reason that I volunteered, that I realised that these were a bad lot, and that if we didn't do it, there'd be in England doing things in England that they were doing. You know, and after the bombing of Warsaw and the treatment of the Jews and whatnot, it was so bad it had to stop. And I think you felt that you were in the right, without any moral Christian idea. But you were in the right. You were doing what you had to do, and you had to do it. And I wanted to do it, get it finished, and get home.
How quickly can you fire the gun in the Firefly?
Oh, quite quickly. All right, you fire, and the recoil is immediate, and the shell case shoots out, and immediately the loader, who has already got another shell out, whilst you're firing, he's getting the second one out, shoves it in, and taps you on the shoulder, and so it's only a matter of seconds, you know. Yes, that was one thing that we did practice, you know.
On the day of the battle, did you know the Canadians were there and where they were positioned?
I knew that there were Canadians somewhere over there. I mean, I knew that there were us, and I knew that there was an English regiment. I didn't know then it was 148 because Bob had since, and they told me that there were Canadians on the other side of the road. We didn't know who or what. We didn't get any details or anything like that, but we do know, but we did know that the Canadians were one side of the road and we were the other.
Excluding your own troops' tanks, did you see anybody else engage the enemy in that action?
No.
There wasn't any firing from anywhere else that you could see?
No. There was no one else firing on that little bit, not where we were. And in fact, there was certainly nobody in our regiment were firing, other than that, because that was the only place where the attack had been made. But if you look at the German records, They specifically say that there were 7 or 8 Tigers which went into the attack, started the attack, that 5 of them were forward and the rest were some considerable way back, that one went on the left-hand side of the road, which on the Canadian side, and it was commanded by a bloke named Hoffler or somebody, that 4 tanks came on our side of the road, and they say that one of them was Wittmann. Nobody knows definitely which it was, but they dug him up from this side of the road anyway, so it must have been there. All right, the Canadians claim that they knocked out 1 Tiger, which must have been the one on their side of the road, and I knocked out 3, and there was one that weren't knocked out at all, which takes up the 4 tanks.
When was the first time you heard about Michael Wittmann?
Some 6 or 8 years after the war. It appears that one of the soldiers in our regiment was a bit of a historian, and he had heard about Wittmann, and he decided that he would go into it, and he went in, and they discovered that Wittmann was in fact one of the in one of those tanks, and that was the first time that I'd ever heard of him. I heard quite a lot about him since and read about him, and quite frankly I'm quite pleased that I got rid of him. He was in the SS, he was in the army before the war, he joined the SS with Dietrich and Himmler, and he accepted the doctrines of Hitler enough to get in his tank and invade other people's countries, left country after country, France, Belgium, Poland, Russia, to kill people, to kill men, women and children, purely to conquer their countries and subjugate the people, and frankly, I think that they were all bad. Not all of them, because there were odd ones who didn't. But anybody who goes into another person's country to kill is a criminal. And Wittmann was in a position to know about the other things going on as well. He was in a high position. I mean, he was friends with Hitler, and as I say, Dietrich, they must have known about what was going on, but they certainly knew what was happening to the Jews before the war started, didn't they? Because everybody in Germany knew that. I mean, they were with the doors being painted, and the Jews and all the rest of it. It's easy after the war to say I didn't know anything about it. No, I mean, not only did he kill people, he gloried in it, in that he painted rings on his gun for when he knocked somebody out. I'm afraid he might have been a hero to the Germans, but not to me.
You mentioned a Typhoon aircraft. What was the theory of the Typhoon?
I say a Typhoon were there, but there were no Typhoons flying, they found out after. And if you look at the German record as well as our record, I mean, I know what happened in our bit, and everybody else knows what happened, because this is one thing about the officer sitting there timing it, whatnot, he saw exactly what had happened. One of the officers in our regiment wrote a history of the regiment, so he interviewed me a month afterwards, and the other bloke a month after, while it was fresh in our minds. So we know what happened there. It appears that when the second German tank blew up, the turret actually blew off. And somebody after the war said that it was the sort of thing that happened when a typhoon had hit the tank. This didn't explain the other tanks that were knocked out or anything, and they checked up. I mean, this bloke who from our regiment who sorted out really went and interviewed French people, German people, and all a lot of it, and he found out from the air authorities that there were no typhoons flying on that day at all.
Did you see any aircraft that day?
No. But all right, there were some aircraft flew. There were the bombers that flew, which bombed us, But that was over the other side from me, a mile away from me, which so we didn't. But we didn't see any other aircraft. No, not at all.
The first tank that you fired at was the last one, right?
Yeah.
Why did you fire at the last tank?
Because that gives you a chance of getting the other two. If you aim at the first one, the other two have got a chance of getting under cover. But if you got three that are out in the open with comparative open, there was a little bit of cover. And if you take the last one, the other two are still targets for you. That was something else that we'd learned actually. Although I've read that some people didn't think like that. They thought that if you got the first one, because they were nearest to you, you were the one who were going to shoot you. But we took the last one.
And you say it was the second tank that the turret blew off. And did it blow off with your one shot?
Yeah, I didn't see the turret come off. Now, on the first two, I actually saw the hits. On the second one, I didn't actually see the hit, because I think I blinked, but I saw it blow up. But bear in mind, it's only a tiny little thing at 3/4 of a mile away, so I didn't actually see the turret blow off, but they found it was off the next day when they... So, it must have... I think it must have hit in the turret ring and the ammunition at the same time.
And where were you positioned, and what could you see?
The road ran along there, and we were here, looking towards the road, and the countryside was nearly flat, but it went down a little bit and just up to the road. But then as the country went round a bit, the gap became, or the dip became deeper. So as you look round, then there was a definite decline in the ground and up on the other side. So it went from where we were looking fairly flat to...
So you fired from the higher ground?
Yes, we were definitely on a slight ridge, and the German tanks were on the slight ridge in front of us. There was a slight dip between us, but not all that.
Why do you think there's controversy now about who killed Wittmann?
Oh well, a lot of it is purely because people like to. So take credit, but that's hardly the... they like to feel that they've done something, and it's like in the First World War, isn't it, when they used to claim, two people used to claim the same one they'd knocked out, and I think there'll always be... In war, there's always that, because...
Do you think it even matters?
No, I don't think it matters. It don't matter as long as he were killed, No, I don't think it matters. I mean, for a long time, I quite frankly, after the war, I was disgusted. I was very naive. I thought we'd come home and that everything would be perfect. I thought that we'd done enough killing and that everybody had had enough of it and it'd be all right. And I mean, the sort of things that happened. After 2 years, they give Krupp his faxes back. Braun, who had been bombing London, sending rockets over London, the Americans and the Russians were almost fighting who were going to have him to do their rocket. I mean, still they're doing the rockets for him, aren't they? And, you know, and, I mean, nobody was worried about peace. They were all worried about war again. I mean, the Russians and the Americans were almost killing each other, and quite frankly, I was so disgusted. I felt that I really felt that I'd wasted 6 years of my life in danger for nothing. And for a long time, I mean, there were lots of people like you who when they found out about Wittmann, phoned me up and asked me to have interviewed one. And for years, I wouldn't have anything to do with it until all these stories started getting around, which I knew were untrue. Well, I knew they were untrue because I was there, you know. And then Ken Tout decided to write a book, and he approached me, and I said, "Are you going to write the truth?" And he said, "Yes, he was." And so I gave him an interview, and he put it in his book. Having said that, he's still got some things wrong in his book, you know. That's the only reason that I felt like taking part in it. And then, by then, I'd found out about things that I didn't know about. I mean, about the concentration camp, which we didn't know about during the war. You know, we war fiction, I didn't even know about then. And I started to find out a bit and found out a bit about Wittmann and all the rest of it, and realised that, in fact, I hadn't wasted my time. What we'd done had been worth doing, and that I felt that everybody ought to know about how awful war is and how terrible it is, and it really is terrible. There's no glory in war at all, none at all. And I felt that the more people knew about it, the better, and as a consequence, anybody who wanted to talk to me and ask me questions, I would be able and willing to answer, which is what I've done since. And I'll talk to anybody now, and mainly with that objective that people know that, you know, that it's wrong. But it'll never change, you see, because war is power, money, and that's all that people are worried about. So it'll never be any different. You know, we can have wars that will end wars, which we thought we were doing, but it don't make a scrap of difference. So I'm afraid that I'm a bit of a cynic now.
It will be hard not to be, I would think. But you did make a difference, especially when you hear about the concentration camps.
Yes, right, absolutely.